Evansville Mayor Lloyd Winnecke is here to give us an update on what's happening in the city of Evansville. That's next on WNIN Lawmakers. Welcome to WNIN Lawmakers. I'm John Gibson, news manager and local host of WNIN FM's Morning Edition. Before we check in with Mayor Winnecke, here's a report from Indiana Public Broadcasting's Brandon Smith on what happened in the General Assembly this week.
A bill advanced by the House would ban teachers from discussing topics around human sexuality in kindergarten to third grade, and force schools to notify parents if children request to change their name or pronouns in a way that is inconsistent with their sex assigned at birth. Supporters say it's about parents' rights. Opponents worry it will create a hostile environment for LGBTQ kids. Transgender children could no longer access gender-affirming medical care, either surgical or medicinal, under a bill approved by a Senate committee. The state's major medical groups oppose the measure and say gender-affirming care can be critical for the well-being of trans children, and the only people from Indiana who supported the bill in committee did not receive gender-affirming care as minors. And under House-approved legislation, courts could no longer remove a transgender child from their parent or guardian if they're denied gender-affirming physical or mental health care, even if that child is suicidal. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
We're joined now by Evansville Mayor Lloyd Winnecke. Mayor, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you here. Well, let's start with some recent news here. There was an announcement at the Evansville War Museum Friday morning. You were there with Lieutenant Governor Crouch. Can you tell us exactly what that was about?
This is really exciting news. I'm sure you remember in December we were designated a World War II Heritage City by the National Park Service. We'll be the only city in Indiana that will receive that designation. Once, I think there are 17 that have been designated around the country. When I was shared that news with Lieutenant Governor Crouch in the succeeding week, she was really excited, and she'd been, of course, to the LST and to the Wartime Museum, but it really got her thinking about what the state could do to build on that and profile and give exposure to really great community amenities that are across the state. So in Evansville, it's the Wartime Museum, it's the LST 325, it's the Evansville Museum of Art, Science, and History. And so they're putting together basically a state military trail to really celebrate communities that have these amenities to encourage tourism. So it will not just be museums but also like historical markers. And it's really a tourism play, but it's really, Suzanne thought of it as a result of our designation.
Will we be seeing like road signs and that kind of thing? Or?
I don't know that. They're still working out the details. They announced on Friday that it will be sort of the full program. They hope to launch on July 4th, which I think is very appropriate. I invited the Lieutenant Governor and Elaine Beadle, who heads the destination, the tourism division for the state, to come back for the 4th of July. I don't know if they will or not, but they certainly hope to roll it out on the 4th.
Sure. Well, let's talk about a few things that have been happening in the city. One thing that caught people's attention this past week was the potential contamination of the Ohio River from that train derailment in Ohio. Could you talk a little bit about what the city did to make sure there weren't any toxins in the city's water supply from that event?
Absolutely. First of all, I think it's important for viewers to know that we test water quality on a daily basis, not just when there's a derailment or potential contamination. So that goes on all the time. In reference to what happened in New Palestine, Ohio, we started following, with the help of Orsanco, the Ohio River Valley Sanitation, or Ohio River Valley Sanitation Commission.
Yeah, Orsanco.
Orsanco, yeah. It's easier to say Orsanco.
Easier to say, yes.
They really help oversee spills and water quality. So we started tracking what was happening in Cincinnati and Louisville, anywhere upstream.
Sure.
When Louisville really got tested, when they started testing their water, they found no contaminants, no traces of the contaminants. So we felt confident that when that happened, we were going to see no traces here. Water was tested in Cannleton, again, upstream, and then when it got to Evansville, also no traces. But out of an abundance of caution, we did add a carbon absorbent to the water. So if there was anything, it would have been absorbed. But the good news is it was a non-story here.
And I understand there was a false story out there somewhere that may have led to you folks having that news conference, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's unfortunate that people take advantage of situations, and they made an incorrect post saying that the city had asked a large employer to not use city water for 12 to 15 hours, but the city wasn't telling anyone else. It was totally fabricated. Again, as I said earlier, we test our water quality on a daily basis. Anyway, it was frustrating, but that's part of social media.
But again, the city didn't ask anyone to.
We did not ask anyone to not drink the water. In fact, I think we have city water right here in this book.
We do, in fact, as a matter of fact. Well, moving on to some other issues. Of course, this is the Lawmakers program. We often have state lawmakers here. Anything that the city is hoping to see from the Indiana General Assembly this session?
We're really curious to see what happens with anything related to that may affect negatively revenue. So anything related to business personal property tax, anything related to property tax in general, if it adversely affects our revenue, we're very concerned about it. So it's a long session, it's a budget session, so there are a lot of sort of fits and starts. You get excited about bills, either positively or negatively for a while. So we're just kind of watching everything. We're very eager to see what the legislature does with Ready 2.0. The governor's asked for additional $500 million. We hope that it's every bit of that. That has proven to be very successful, as was Ready 1.0, I guess, and regional cities prior to that. So we're keeping our eye on that, certainly.
Certainly. You mentioned the governor. He, of course, is not running for re-election. He cannot. You've decided not to run for another term as Evansville mayor. There's been some speculation or analysis that the governor, perhaps, not having to face a re-election is perhaps asking for more than you might have expected from the General Assembly. In your position, do you feel, how are you addressing these last 11 months? Do you feel, like there's no pressure to get reelected? Therefore, perhaps, what are your goals under those circumstances?
Well, that's a really good question, and there are a lot of ways to answer it. One, we have a lot of projects that we are currently working on that have been well publicized that we need to continue to advance. Some are construction oriented, some are programs to put in place, and we're also working on new initiatives that are still we're either helping to or trying to negotiate to get finalized so we can get papered and agreed upon and announced yet this year. We certainly hope that we'll be able to break ground at 5th and Main this year before I leave office.
That's the site of the old National Bank building.
We're having really good discussions with our new developer. It took a little bit of time just from an administrative standpoint on the state level to have the state approve the transfer of the state incentives from the original developer to the new developer. Just it's a process,
sure.
and things don't always happen as quickly as we'd like, but that is now happening, and so we'd like to break ground on that. We anticipate that we'll be able to open the skate park on the riverfront this year. We broke ground in December. I think the contract calls for the phase one, the dirt work, to be done by the end of April. There are a lot of projects certainly related to the water and sewer utility. We, as you know, are working to construct a new water treatment plant to replace the one that opened in 1897. We're going to build the new plant at the site of this current city garage. So we found a new location for the city garage. That has to be constructed. We have to relocate the Levy Authority building on Waterworks Road. Those have to happen. The designing a new water treatment plant is a cumbersome, time-consuming process. It's about 70 or 75% designed right now. So there are lots of projects, and we have ongoing one-on-one conversations with all of our department heads, making sure all these projects and initiatives stay on track.
You mentioned the 420 Main location. You hope to have a groundbreaking this year. Any idea on a timetable for that big project?
We'd initially hoped mid-year-ish, but the delay in transferring the state incentives has taken longer than we had expected. So probably third or fourth quarter. It will be later in the year versus earlier.
All right. Well, let's talk about a few other projects in the city. There's been a lot of discussion about the planned pickleball courts in the Wesselman Park redesign. Can you tell us essentially where that is? And there was some redesign there, correct?
There was redesign based on input we received from mainly opponents of the project. It has been put out to bid. The bids were opened in the most recent Parks Board meeting, as happens with practically every bid opening in any department. Bids are opened, they're read into the record, and they're taken under advisement to it. And then there's all these compliance steps that make sure to ensure that all the proper legal procedures were followed. So that's being done now. We're evaluating those bids now, and we hope to make some decisions in the coming weeks.
Yeah. This past week, in the mayor's race for your replacement, both parties asked to remove a candidate from each ticket in the primaries. The election board went along with that. So barring, an enormous write-in campaign or something unforeseen, the next mayor will be a woman. What are your thoughts? First on that ruling by the election board, that's in connection with a new state law, but also the milestone of a female mayor.
First of all, I'm not a lawyer, but what I've followed in the media and what I've heard, I think the election board followed certainly the spirit of the state statute.
Right.
As for my successor, I think it is exciting that we have an opportunity to have the city's first female chief executive, and it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Yes, indeed. Well, as you look back on your years as mayor of Evansville, what are some of the things you hope to be remembered for, and maybe some things that you hope to accomplish before you leave office?
Yeah, that's a good way to ask the question, and I hadn't really thought of it that way. But I think I'd like to be remembered as a mayor who was just amazingly accessible. I think I'd like to be known as the mayor who, even in times of disagreement, showed respect and common courtesy to opponents on any issue. I'd like to think I'd be known as a good convener. A mayor should never be the one who has all the great ideas, but I think a successful mayor ought to be able to recognize a good idea and bring the right parties to the table to advance those good ideas. In terms of, you didn't ask this specifically, I get asked this a lot though, and in terms of what I'm most proud of.
Right.
And I would tell you from a bricks and mortar standpoint, I think what's happened at the medical school site, the Stone Family Center for Health Sciences, I think is an amazing collaboration, and I think in 20 or 30 years, I think residents will look back and say, wow, that was a real game changer, not just from an economic development standpoint or a downtown development standpoint,
right,
but from a healthcare perspective. I mean, what's happening on that campus where you have graduate and undergraduate students learning healthcare education from the IU School of Medicine, from the University of Evansville and the University of Southern Indiana, all in one location, it's powerful. So we're building a new pipeline of healthcare professionals. And there are going to be other projects that they're working on. The University of Evansville recently received Ready Grant money for a new project on that campus.
Right.
And that is exciting. That project will include not only housing for University of Evansville students, but also classroom and clinical space, which we badly need already, which is, I think, a good sign that the project and the whole vision was correct, to be a new parking garage. So I'm really proud of that. The other thing that's a little more difficult, or sort of to put your arms around, I think the level of collaboration community-wise, has really improved over the last 10 to 20 years. I talk to people all over Indiana. They come in for various projects or initiatives, whether it's economic development, healthcare, mental health, you name it, and they're amazed at how easy it is to get people around the table who are working in that like space, no matter what it is, to advance an initiative. And so I think the level of collaboration and community spirit, I think, is really, I'm really proud of that.
Well, as we know, Evansville residents have had a tough time with utility costs lately, inflation. The city has facilitated times that people can talk with utility companies about their bills, those face-to-face meetings. How big of an issue is this for the affordability of living in the city of Evansville?
It's a huge issue. We're fortunate that we are a relatively affordable city. I talk to mayors all over the state on a regular basis, and I know that the cost of living here is better than many communities. But nonetheless, if you are financially challenged, it doesn't matter how we compare to other cities. It's how you compare to your neighbor or someone down the street. What we've done is taken federal dollars from COVID relief funds, and we allocated $4 million to the Utility Relief Fund. And that's been in place less than a year, but we know that many people are taking advantage of it.
Right.
Fewer people are taking advantage of it than we had projected. I think it took effect in June. We'll evaluate its success and decide whether we remarket it, if we redirect those dollars, but we know it certainly benefits those who choose to use it. We've developed these access to service fares that you referenced.
Right.
They really started last year as a result of a really harsh winter and really high utility bills, and a lot of people were really in a lot of pain. This year we scheduled 6, and we did that before it even got cold so people could have them on their calendars. But these access to service fares are really important because it really, we all get frustrated by emails or voicemails or a lack of response. So these access to service fares gives someone the chance to sit down face to face with a customer service representative, whether it's from CenterPoint Energy or the Evansville Water and Sewer Utility, to really say, okay, here's my situation. How can I avoid a shutoff, no matter which utility? And that's been really, really beneficial. I've been to every one of those. I haven't stayed the entire time, but I've been to every one. And I've seen people who are really grateful for the opportunity to avoid shutoff and to make payment arrangements, to learn how they can be more effective consumers of utilities. I think they're really helpful, and I suspect that before we get done, we'll schedule another round of those for the next winter season.
Well, a few weeks ago, the Deaconess Aquatic Center, that was a facility that has opened under your tenure. It hosted the GLVC men's and women's swimming and diving championships. How did that event go? How is the Aquatic Center going at this point?
Yeah, that was a huge event. It was the Great Lakes Valley Conference is arguably the strongest Division II swimming and diving conference in the United States. So for the GLVC to choose Evansville was a big deal. It was a huge success. The YMCA, which is our operating partner for the Deaconess Aquatic Center, does and did for that event a phenomenal job. We know that hundreds of people came in to support their swimmers, and it's just a huge boost to the city. It gives exposure to the city in ways that we normally wouldn't have. It's a really good test run because in 2025 we'll host the NCAA National Swimming and Diving Championships at the Aquatic Center. So it was a good chance to kind of get our sea legs. No pun. Maybe not a pun, but
close.
Will really help us put the facility through its paces. It's hosted other meets before, collegiate and high school, and we're having great success.
Now, next week, the Ford Center hosts the Ohio Valley Conference Basketball Championships. So, what does it mean? You've touched on this a little bit, but what does it mean for Evansville to host these kinds of events? What is the impact on the city?
It's a huge impact, like the swimming and diving, but probably to a greater extent because these will be televised games, and the winner of the men's championship will be the first team into the field of 64 for the NCAA championship. So they'll have their ticket punched, as they say, on a court ceremony. But this just gives our city exposure in ways that most communities don't get. As Indianapolis has a great niche for large-scale athletic events and sports tourism, we've really carved out a really good niche for Division II, Division III, and mid-major Division I athletic sports tourism. People stay in our hotels, they eat in our restaurants, shop in our shops, and it's just great exposure.
All right, a recent issue of the Wall Street Journal managed Evansville ranked quite high, one of the top places for remote workers, ranking at third according to that Wall Street Journal report. Why do you think Evansville received that distinction?
Well, I think I'm not exactly. Certainly read the story. I don't remember all their criteria for how they selected us, but I think it speaks to what Evansville is, and it's a great place to recruit talent. The fact that we have that distinction is certainly something we can use to sell the greater Evansville region to not only employers who are thinking about expanding here, but thinking about to employers who are thinking about coming here. And I think probably weekly, I'm sure weekly, I talk to employers who want more opportunities, and they're making greater work arrangements for their employees. The fact that we were recognized, again, that kind of exposure, other mayor, you can be sure that I heard from other mayors like, hey, way to go.
Right.
It's nice distinction.
You mentioned exposure. How important is exposure compared to, say, just the number of heads in beds and that kind of stuff, filling up the hotels and the restaurants? Or I guess one feeds the other?
Yeah, I think that it'd be difficult to say one is more important than the other. The reality is they're both important. You do want heads in beds because that leads to the other economic impact of going to the bars and the restaurants and the shops. Yet, if you sit at home and you're in Charleston, Illinois, watching Eastern Illinois play in the OVC tournament here, like, oh, I need to get to Evansville. I mean, so you don't have that immediate gratification of economic impact, but it will down the road. It's really big.
Well, as we mentioned, you're in your final year as mayor of Evansville. Any idea on what awaits you next once you leave office?
No, I do get that asked a lot. I'm too young to retire, so we'll get that on the table right away. And so there are some opportunities out there that we're looking at and kind of starting to talk to people about. I want to be in some sort of leadership position in the city, not city government. I'm not going to run for office anymore. And so we'll see. I have refurbished and updated my resume, so it's available.
So you and the First Lady plan to stay in Evansville? Is that the plan?
We do. We bought a new condo in downtown. We sold our other condo in downtown, and we're renovating it. And so our plan is to stay here.
Anything else you'd like to add that we haven't touched on here?
Oh my gosh, there's so much going on. I would just tell you that every day and every week there are opportunities that present themselves. Very frequently I'm asked, so I guess you're on Easy Street now, you're kind of coasting. I'm not coasting. There's plenty to do. I'm somewhere or in my office by 7:30 most days, and if I can get home by 6:30, that's a good thing.
It's a pretty short day?
Yeah,
all right.
It's manageable.
All right, Mayor Lloyd Winnecke, thank you so much for joining us. We certainly appreciate it. Hope to see you again.
My pleasure.
Next week, our scheduled guests are U.S. Congressman Larry Bouchon and Indiana State Senator Mark Messmer. I'm John Gibson of WNIN FM. Thanks for watching WNIN Lawmakers.